Hey, so this is the first stream. I'm just doing an experiment, trying to figure out if this is a good way to keep in touch with the community, uh, spend some dedicated time with some personal projects. So let's see where this goes. And if you are in chat or see this later, please drop me a message to see what you would like to hear or what you would like to do in this stream. I'll go over a few things that I have in mind. So why do I want to stream? So there is this inherent fun in building and tinkering with things, which we often miss out on because we are in too much of a rush to just deliver something as part of our jobs or you know a project that you might be doing as part of a course or something like that. So I wanted to set apart this time to just take things slow, take things at a joyful pace, and not worry too much about where we end up, but try to enjoy the journey. Uh, Depending on who joins, who comes up and interacts, this may be an interesting way to keep in touch with people and interact with people from diverse backgrounds, because the tech community is rich with people from all sorts of backgrounds, and it's not often possible to go and meet people too much. Given the current state of the world, it's not possible to go and meet people at all. So maybe this is the way to go forward with that. So as I said, I want to dedicate some personal time to projects that I want to do over time. This is also an effort to keep on learning continuously. This is something that I have done for a very long time and I don't have any plans of stopping. It helps keep the mind sharp. The other reason why I want to stream is that I have varied interests. Not all of those interests align with, say, my day job or other dedicated time that I have to work on those projects. So maybe this is a time where I can pick up things that strike my fancy, learn about them, and hopefully share with a few people what's going on. So what projects? One of the things that I do on a periodic basis is to pick up new programming languages, and I have a few in the pipeline, few I have been playing with a little bit, and I would want to kind of build something in those languages which is a little bit non-trivial. And before we get there, there is some time to maybe go explore old habits. For instance, I used to do a bunch of work in the networking field, and maybe we can pick up something from there. So there is this other side of projects that I have in mind, which is about doing things that we don't often do as part of our daily work as people working in the tech field. So this might lead to, say, things like contribute back to the open source community instead of just consuming all the time, as we all do, right? And along those lines, there are a few other ideas which I'll talk about as things go along. So what could a first good project be? As I said, I want to do things where I can take some time, not be in a hurry, relax a little bit, chill out, and then hopefully we will be able to produce something out of it, right? It's a wish. Let's see if it gets fulfilled. So the first thing I have in mind might sound weird, but I have been trying to build a keyboard for a very long time, and this is not something I do usually or too often. This would be the first time I build a keyboard, but I have done a lot of work on robotics and electronics decades back, and I'm trying to revive that habit a little bit, see if it still interests me. And it so turns out that I need a keyboard. So what better way to get a keyboard than to build one, right? So that's what I have in mind for the first project I want to take up, and let's see where that goes. So what could we do first? I thought one thing I could do is I am at a stage where I have been acquiring parts a little bit for the keyboard I have in mind, and I want to take some inventory of those parts, see what I have missing, and acquire those parts maybe over the coming week or so, and then finally get down to actually building it in some time. I think there are 3 stages of any project, right? Which is the planning, the thought that goes behind it, actually coming together with something that might work, and assembling all the resources we need for it, and then actually executing on that. So at least those 3 are important parts of any project for me. And once we are executing on something and something interesting comes out of it, we might have other things we want to do in follow-ups. I should remind myself not to say we too much, because right now it's just me. So I'll try and say me. Okay, so what keyboard? So a few considerations went into thinking about what keyboard I would want to build, and why build a keyboard I'll probably come back to in a little while. So one of the reasons I wanted to build a keyboard for a very long time is I like tinkering with things, and I like things that I use to be as flexible as possible so that I could adapt those tools to my liking. And if what I need to do is very regular, then it's fine, right? Just take something off the shelf. And I've been using off the shelf keyboards all my life. So mechanical keyboards are of course very, very customizable. I have an off the shelf mechanical keyboard with me right now, which I use. I'll show you in a minute. And one thing which I want to do is try to explore the next level of customizability. There are a few reasons or thoughts that went into why I need a new keyboard anyway, right? I mean, of course I don't need it, I just want it. So one of the things is hands, right? So keyboards today aren't very ergonomic, in the sense they are not shaped keeping our hands and our natural positions of our hands in mind. So I looked up what options exist, and one thing I'm looking for now is a split keyboard, one that has a slightly better positioning of the hands, so shoulder width, split, and hopefully able to keep an angle which seems more natural to me. And this is all personal, not one size doesn't fit all here. So that's where the customizability comes in. And there are off-the-shelf options available, but given the current situation, it's pretty hard to buy anything. And so one thing I thought was maybe I'll assemble some parts for a split keyboard I have had my eyes on for a very long time, which is the Ergodox. And I do have a bunch of parts with me, so I'll go through an inventory for now. And two main things I'm looking for. One, less emphasis on the little finger, right? Because I have slightly weak little fingers from whatever injuries in the past I've had and so on. So I don't want to rely on this little finger. Even right now I don't use my little finger much. But if you look at a normal keyboard, a lot of important keys like enter, backspace are all in the little finger zone, and I end up just tilting my wrist to use the ring finger for those, right? That's not good. I did have some pain in my hands off and on. I've been trying to avoid that kind of a problem with some breaks and exercises, but let's see if a slightly different keyboard helps that also. So one thing I want to do is I want to avoid moving my hands around too much. So this would be using, so even with the normal keyboard, I tend to move my hands to say reach the arrow keys or reach backspace, delete, home, page up, page down, all those. So one way of avoiding those movements is to move things into the home row with different layers, right? And I'll try that a little bit. I use that kind of a setup with my current system. Let me show you that. I don't know if anybody's ever going to watch this, but let's pretend anyway. Okay, I think this should be visible. So this is my current keyboard. It is it's a 65% keyboard. let's ignore the jargon for now. The idea is keep your hands on the home row. I do that, and I use some modifiers too. For example, arrow keys are with pressing one half of the space bar and then using JKL, just like Vim, and so on. So that has helped a lot. But one thing I want to do is use the thumbs a lot more, and the ErgoDocs design does that beautifully. It has a cluster of keys on the thumbs, which allow us to program them with layers and so on, and modifiers. So avoid bending the wrists, use a little bit more comfortable design. I never really liked this kind of staggered design, so I'm looking for a more linear kind of design. And it could, I thought of purely ortholinear ones, which has a matrix of keys without any stagger. I'm not sure about it yet. So for now, it also depends on what parts I'm able to get, right? So I have parts for the ErgoDocs, so that's what I'll build for now. So ultimately, it turned out to be an interesting journey to gather all the parts for this sort of a project. And it wasn't simple, given that it's difficult to procure those parts in India, which is where I stay, right? And these aren't very commonly available things. Like you could go full custom, build your own PCBs and so on, but for some reason I didn't want to go that far yet, right? Most of the week I'm just doing my day job, and I'm hardly able to spend a few hours a week on these projects, right? So I have been collecting parts maybe for almost a year now, and I think I have enough to get started on the actual build. So that's the plan. So the keyboard that I will be building is an ErgoDocs, but I can't build an ErgoDocs vanilla because I don't have the parts. For instance, I don't have the microcontroller. So I have procured replacements, and I will have to do some modifications to the design to be able to actually use those parts. So that's one thing I want to do today. I want to take maybe half an hour or more to go over all the parts that I would need to actually have one working keyboard, and what out of that I have available. So let's go over the parts. Okay. So this is the ergodocs.io site. I went over this design. So this thumb cluster is something that is very interesting for me because it serves the requirement of using thumb a lot more. This is the most versatile finger that we have, and unfortunately in the current keyboard designs we don't use it for much at all, right? We use it to press the space bar, and that's pretty much it, right? So I like this design. Another thing I want to do is use less of the little finger, as I said. So this allows programmable keys on the outer periphery, and maybe I'll not program these at all in the beginning, right? So I want to stick to the main three fingers, the index finger, the middle finger, and the ring finger, along with the thumb for the most time. So let's skip ahead to the parts section. Yes, so there are some common parts, main thing being the printed circuit board. Now, this is kind of the thing which you can't start this kind of a project without. Of course, you could go fully manual and hand wire something with no PCB. Maybe I'll do that at some point in time. But for now, I wanted something with a PCB where I can dedicate a little bit of time to assembling the things together, doing the soldering and so on, and have a working keyboard. But waiting for a printed circuit board to be available turned out to be a project in itself. And interestingly, one friend kind of got their hands on a few of these boards. Maybe I'll invite them to come on to the stream and talk about it a little bit, how they acquired these. So I have PCBs for this keyboard now. Let me go over those. Okay. Let's see if this focuses. Right. So that is one PCB. One PCB here is for half of a keyboard. So I have PCBs enough for 1.5 keyboards. In fact, I might end up building 1.5 keyboards. Yes, I'm weird like that. So I have this PCB, which is a slightly old version of this design, but it fits my needs perfectly because it has options for the keys to be moved around a little bit in and out, and also have this cluster of keys at the thumb side, which can be either used as 2 big keys and 1, 2, 3, 4 small keys, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 small keys, 1 U keys. So that's one option I have. Yes, there are 3 of these that I have. So these are reversible, and I will be using one of these to build one half keyboard, which is going to be used as kind of a macro keyboard for switching things for one application I have in mind at home. And the rest of the other 2 will be part of my main keyboard, which will replace my daily driver keyboard here. Okay, so I do have the PCBs. Yeah, thanks to the friend. I'll check with them and maybe do a small section with them to chat about how they were able to acquire these PCBs. So that's one. There is a bunch of other small parts here. I wanted to make a small quick spreadsheet about those and see which one of these I can acquire, need replacements or alternatives for, and so on, right? So I'll do that now. Right, so let's take this list. Okay, oh, I already did this. Let me see if this is useful. I was trying this out a few. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I wanted to split this into a spreadsheet. This will work. So I'll copy this. Go back here. I wanted to paste it here. Come on, do it. Nope. Weird. Somehow I didn't copy. Go do that again. There. Right now. Split into columns on custom. There. There's a quantity item and I think one tricky thing I wanted to kind of address here is whether I have them or not and whether I need a replacement, right? Okay. Let's see, one pair of PCBs, one for each hand that I have. Right, so this is the microcontroller. TNZ USB board version 2. Now the problem with this board is that Yeah. So this is a pretty good board, but unfortunately I couldn't source it anywhere in India, or it was insanely expensive compared to its actual cost anywhere else. So, given the current situation, I looked around for what alternatives I have, and if I could say take uh, something which has the same chipset, the Atmega 32U4, and then maybe it has a different pinout, but I could then do some adaptation in either the software firmware or use hand wiring if it comes to that. So the common alternatives for this are the Arduino Pro Micro. That's something I found. And the Pro Micro is interesting because it is the same exact. It's the same exact board, but it has a slightly different pinout on out of the board, right? So, no, not the Arduino Micro, the Pro Micro. Yeah, I think this is the one. Yes. So this has the same chipset, the 32U4, but it has a pretty different pinout. And I was able to actually find these in a local store, which was delivering to home during COVID. So after all the restrictions and everything, I was still able to procure two of these, and they're reasonably priced, much cheaper than this weird price that we have here. I think these are clones. These are not the ones I have are clones. They are not the original ones from SparkFun or the other sources which sell these. But they should work just as well, and that's an experiment again. So I was able to get these for just under maybe $6 a piece, roughly. Okay. So this is the microcontroller I'm using, and one challenge with this is that its pinout is different. So I will have to kind of map the pins of the microcontroller I'm using, the Pro Micro, to the assumptions made in the PCB that I have. Good thing is that most of these pins are data pins. So if with data pins and a software for a programmable microcontroller like this, you can always remap the pins in software. And I'm trying to do this mapping in such a way that I am able to drop this into the PCB as far as possible, and maybe remap things in the firmware so that the PCB's rows and columns in the keyboard are on the correct software pins, if I may call them that. So essentially the way a keyboard works is there is a matrix of keys, and when you press down a key, you are connecting a row and a column, and the software internally, firmware, is scanning this matrix for key presses, and it registers the fact that you have pressed a particular row column, right? And the rows and columns thankfully are decided by configurations in the software. So that's the route I'm going. Take a Pro Micro, do a mapping between its hardware pins to the Teensy 2.0's hardware pins. These are essential because I don't want to have to fully hardwire it or handwire it, right? I could do that, but then it will be a little messy, right? So so this is where this corner is where the microcontroller actually sits, right? And since this is a reversible PCB, just right at the back of it is a port expander or IO expander, which allows one controller to be used for the two halves in a regular orthodox design. Okay, come on. This thing doesn't focus too well, does it? Teething issues for streaming hardware, I guess. But anyway, I think the main challenge I will have is trying to match the Pro Micro's pins to the Teensy's pins. That is mostly look at the two pinout diagrams somewhere and map them. And the other one being taking something like this and actually dropping it in terms of the pins, right? And good thing is that the side pins of the Teensy 2.0 aren't used. So if I go back to the Teensy layout here, there are these side pins, right? So thankfully the side pins aren't used in the ergodox, which is evident from the fact that here there are no side holes, right? So these are essentially extra pins which the firmware wouldn't use. Now the Pro Micro doesn't even have these pins. So one problem is solved, I guess, there, right? It doesn't have any pins on the side, unlike the Teensy 2, which has these side pins, or at least places for side pins. So if you look at the instructions, it's clear that you should just leave out soldering these pins while putting headers onto the Teensy 2. Right, so that's one problem solved. The other problem is the main power supply and ground pins. Those cannot be changed, of course. So, and they aren't interchangeable in any microcontroller or any circuit for so on. So for instance, the top right pin here is VCC, which is usually 5 volts, and the top right pin here is raw, which is raw power. That can actually work because it internally conditions the raw power into a 5 volt. But there is another VCC pin here, right? And if you see, that is 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's raw, ground, reset, and VCC in the Pro Micro. And in the Teensy, it is VCC, F0, F1, F4. These aren't power pins. These are data pins, and we need these. So one thing is clear, that on this top right side, I can't use these pins as they are on the PCB. So for the Pro Micro, for the Teensy, the power pins are VCC and ground across. For Pro Micro, they are raw, ground, and VCC on the right hand side. There are additional ground pins across from those which can be used. But for instance, this is the pin which is ground for Teensy is TX0 for Pro Micro. So these are the kind of mappings that I will have to do in order to use a Pro Micro instead of a Teensy on a PCB that is built for the Teensy. So that's challenge number 1. Let's see what else. So here's how this is going to play out. I'll take both the pinouts. I'll build up a sketch on what are the equivalent pins. Even the data pins are not interchangeable based on the designation they have from the actual microcontroller's point of view. So if a pin A0 is in a particular place for, like, you see this pin is A0 for the Pro Micro. However, A0 is in a very different place for, where is A0? I can't even say it here. Okay, so we'll have to look at the header pins. Sorry, we'll have to look at the pinout to actually figure out where the equivalent pins reside. And then the firmware is written for the Teensy. So I will have to change a bit of the firmware's mappings to use the equivalent actual pins in the Pro Micro. So that's something I will do over maybe later part of this stream or the next one. So that's one part. I'll take a very quick break here and maybe I'll continue in maybe 2 minutes or so. I'm back. I think one of the reasons this stream is experimental is that I don't know if the hardware I have is able to fully keep pace with the settings I have. For instance, I'm trying to stream at 1080p, 60 hertz, 60 frames per second. I think I did one thing right by setting the frame output to 30 frames per second for now. But even with that, I see a lot of dropped frames. About 10% of frames are getting dropped. So I guess it will be pretty weird to look at. Thankfully, it's a first stream and I don't think anybody is in chat right now. So let me just check who's here. Nobody. Okay. I will just continue, I guess. And one of the things I wanted to do today is take stock of where we are, and the parts list is one of those things, right? So I went into this spreadsheet. So this is not available, and hence I need replacements. So this is the Pro Micro. Needs pinout mapping plus maybe a bit of hand wiring plus firmware adjustments. What? See, this is the reason I don't like my current setup in the programmable keyboard, because this has modes instead of a lot of modifiers, and sometimes I hit a mode change switch and it just goes bonkers. So let me come back to the mode I have set up here. Okay. Yeah, still seeing a bunch of frame drops. All right. Header pins. So header pins I don't have. Oh, sorry. I think I didn't notice that. So this little packet here has the, come on, focus. No. Yep. So this little packet here has header pins as well as the microcontroller. So that solves one part of the problem, and I'll just mark that off today. So I have two of these microcontrollers, and that is for a reason. So this says you need one, but replacement is 2 of Pro Micros. So what's happening is, in the Pro Micro we have fewer pins, and so it comes with I think total of 20 pins which I can use. I'll have to check that again. But the total number of pins which are available are lesser than what are available in the Teensy. So a single Pro Micro is kind of little difficult to use as a replacement for a Teensy, especially if the Teensy was using all of the pins. But that's not so in the ergodocs, and hence I might be able to scrape through with a single Pro Micro with a bit of adaptation. However, one problem is that there is a small gotcha. That gotcha will be visible in the parts list again. So there is this IO expander that is required. Now, so this is the headers are available, that's fine. The IO expander, the MCP23018E/SP. This is the chip that allows one controller to use 2 sites, right? So if I go very close here, I can focus. So this chip here, right? The MCP23018. This allows the signal from the other half, the one which has the microcontroller, to be kind of minimized into two data lines that are then connected across the two halves with a much simpler cable than would be needed for taking all of the rows and columns out from one half and into the other, right? So this IO expander is essentially if one wants to use one microcontroller, the Teensy, with two halves. Now I don't have this IO expander, unfortunately. Same problem, no local available sources in India, and there are replacements available, but then I wouldn't be able to use them with this PCB. So for instance, there is this is a DIP version, so the dual-sided the integrated circuit, which has legs on two sides. So let me look it up now. Okay, not really. MCP23018, right? Let's look it up. Yep, you can see it's commonly used here. So this kind of a setup is where we have okay, I'm not screen sharing here. Yep. So this two-sided version just drops directly into the pins on the PCB. The one I was able to source locally was a single inline and a much denser pinout, so I wouldn't be able to drop it into this PCB. So long story short, I can't use this. What's Jack Sparrow doing here? Anyway, so this is the one, an SMD version of it, which I was able to source, and then there is a single inline version, which don't see here, but yeah, that's another option available. But this one isn't available anymore, at least locally. So can't use that. And I looked around to what people might have done to modify the ergodox, because one good thing about ergodox is that it's open source end to end, and so the PCB design is open source, the circuit diagram is open source, all the files for that are available in the ergodox repository, GitHub repo, and so people have modded the ergodox design a lot, and that's one of the reasons I like the ergodox design, because it allows you full flexibility. You can take what off the shelf manufactured PCBs like the one I have here and just solder components in. It was sold as a kit. I'm not sure if it's available as a kit anymore with the components necessary, but there have been I think hundreds of derivatives of the ergodox design which have modified the controllers as well. So given the cost difference between Pro Micros and the Teensy 2.0s, a lot of people have preferred the Pro Micros over time, and the IO expander kind of is a nice to have, but isn't something which is strictly necessary. So what people have done is they have used two microcontrollers, one on each half, and this is essentially entirely possible. So what you need to do is you need to compile the firmware, the QMK firmware, which is also open source, separately for the left half and the right half, program each of the boards, and then they communicate over pretty much the same cable that would be used in the original design. Right, so that's the way I'm going. That's why I have two Pro Micros as replacements for one Teensy plus one IO expander. So IO expander is not available and the replacement is a Pro Micro. So this is interesting. Now here's another challenge. Okay, I like challenges. As I said, this is not a stream meant for just getting things done. It's something where I want to explore these small challenges, particularly when they are about using things slightly out of context or adapting designs to better suit availability of parts and so on, right? So one of the things is, if you look at this, I am holding two PCBs here. Let me turn one around so that you can see the... Right. So the Teensy on top and the IO expander at the bottom, they are in the same exact physical space on the PCB. Now, beauty of this design is that it's reversible in terms of flip and you get the other hand's PCB. So the components go on one side, and the side the components go on decides how they're connected, in the sense that you wouldn't place the same component on both sides. So you wouldn't place a Teensy and a IO expander on the same board, right? And hence it allows us an interesting kind of a hack, but not really. So what we would do is, what people have done is they have used a Pro Micro on either side in adapted designs, right? So not on this PCB, but they have modified the PCB to actually take a Pro Micro on each side of the setup. Okay. So I can't do that. What I'm going to do is right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take two Pro Micros, flip a Pro Micro and put it on as if it was inserted on the right hand side. So the right hand side PCB, again, let me switch to the side view. Right, so these are the two hands, right? So the right hand side PCB has a Teensy here, right? Wow, my finger's really shiny because of something I put here. So it has this Teensy 2.0 here, which communicates with over what is essentially an audio cable, a TRRS cable, onto the other side, which is connected to the IO expander here, right? So instead of the IO expander, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put, because it has the space for a Teensy right here. So instead of mounting the other Pro Micro here, I'm going to mount it reverse from this side. So yes, it's a bit of a hack. This is something that was suggested and done by somebody who wrote a post about this on one of the forums I was reading. And I like the idea because that allows me total flexibility on reusing the PCB as is, along with the two microcontroller setup. What I don't know is whether all of this will work, so that's always fun. Okay. Right. So what else? So we have this. This requires a separate QMK file for left Pro Micro, right? And there are options about what kind of an interface the two controllers will have between the two halves, so we will come to that. Now comes the interesting part, the switches, right? So this design takes Cherry MX compatible switches. So again, there are a lot of options here. I won't go into all of the options. If people are interested, we can try it out. Hey Big Omega, hi. Okay, I realize I'm a newbie streamer, so I am trying to chat back at people in the users, but I can just talk, right? Hey, thanks for dropping in. You are officially the first person to join one of my streams. Hey, thank you. And feel free to ask any question. I want to make this as interactive as possible, but that's hard to do with nobody in the chat. So now that you are here in chat, feel free to ask anything, any ideas or comments you have. It'll be wonderful to hear what you think of what I'm doing here. So I know you joined a little bit later, so I'll do a quick overview of what I'm doing, and maybe you can watch the recording a little bit later. So I went over why I'm streaming, and the project I've picked up is building an Ergodox keyboard. So I'll show you the parts that I have. Right. So these are the PCBs, one for each side. So yes, 3 sides, right? No. So there are 2 sides here. I'm talking about choices for the components that I was able to actually source, because the components that this PCB is built for aren't really available off the shelf in India. So I talked about the microcontroller itself. Instead of the Teensy 2.0, I am using a Pro Micro, an Arduino Pro microcontroller. And instead of an IO expander on this side, I am using another microcontroller. So now I'll have two microcontrollers, like a true split brain, and they'll communicate over or essentially an audio cable. Yeah, thanks for dropping in, Big Omega. It's awesome to have somebody to talk to, and yeah, hopefully you'll have some inputs and some interesting points to share. Go ahead. So one thing is, I could not procure the original microcontroller and the IO expander. I replaced each of these with Pro Micros. So I'll have to do the adjustments for that, right? The other thing is switches. So I personally prefer tactile switches because they are both quiet and have some feedback. I have been using Cherry MX Brown switches for the longest time. So this keyboard has Cherry MX Brown switches. It is what they sound like. This is when I'm bottoming out the switch, right? But if I just press it so that it activates, there's hardly any sound, right? So with a little bit of practice, you can actually operate them in pretty quiet way, right? I'll unplug the keyboard and type out a little bit. So this is when I'm typing hard. However, typing soft also works, right? So you can just do it this way. So I like Cherry MX Brown switches for that because they're readily available and are tactile enough for my kind of usage. So people whom I share office with also have said that, mechanical keyboards are loud, whether these are quiet switches or non-quiet switches. They are much louder than, say, standard laptop keyboards, right? So I share my current office space with at least one other person who sits here, if not a whole office of people. So I wanted to be on the quieter side, but I don't like linear switches which don't have any feedback, right? So I picked tactile as the category of switches. But one of the things I wanted to do was move beyond Cherry MX Browns because they're just the default tactile switch, and they're good. Like I have two keyboards, one here with MX Browns, but it kind of getting bored of them. I wanted to explore what other tactile switches are available. So I talked to another person in the mechanical keyboard community for India, and they had some options available for tactile switches as well, right? So one of the things I was able to get to is and talk to people about and actually acquire are the Zelios V2 switches. So these are interesting switches in the fact that they are compatible with Cherry MX for the most part, but kind of move beyond the MX Brown design, and they have slightly different characteristics of how you feel the bump, right? So in tactile switches there is a bump as you press down. So in MX Brown switches the bump comes after a little bit of press, but the Zelios V2 switch has a bump right at the top. So sounded interesting. I don't have a very strong opinion either way because I haven't used them, but I went ahead and acquired a bunch of these switches. So I did get a pack of brown switches just in case, because switches are a little bit hard to procure in this restricted time that we are currently living in. So I wanted to have a few familiar ones on my in my box of parts, right? And these I probably will not be using. The ones I will be using are these, right? These are Zelios V2 switches. So I'll open and show a few. By the way, Big Omega, if you could tell me whether the audio is okay and if the music is too loud, that will be awesome. I can't judge that myself, so I'm just asking out for some help here. Yep, there you go. So these switches, which look very dark because of my horrible lighting here. Yeah, so these are Z0E1 V2 switches, and it wouldn't really be audible. Let me try this. Yep, little bit audible, right? Or maybe a lot audible. So they have a bump right at the top, unlike, yeah, so the bump starts here, right? Unlike brown switches, which the bump starts a little bit below. Anyway, long story short, this is not about where the bump starts for the tactile feedback. This is more about what switches I could acquire, right? And I have Cherry MX browns if I don't like the Z0E1 V2 for some reason, but for the most part I'll be using these switches. Now I have to take stock of how many I have. I think I know from acquiring them how many I should have, but I never really counted. So I will take stock right now, and I also have another packet here of some more of these, so I'll take them out. These are a mix actually of two different variants. One which have a slightly lighter spring, 65 gram force, and the other which is slightly, very slightly heavier spring, 67 gram force. For the most part you can't tell them apart while using. That's what I've heard, and I guess it's fine, because in a keyboard nobody's comparing switch weights, right? It depends on what the feel for the switch is. Okay, so these are so I have the switches and I have these stabilizers as well, in case I need to use them, but I probably may not use them. So getting back to the parts list, so I have a bunch of these switches, and so instead of Cherry MX I have used Z0E1 V2, which is 65G/67G. Now what else? All right, no real extra work needed there. They will just fit in for the most part. Okay, diodes. So I have a bunch of diodes again from another very helpful person I met as part of a keyboard meetup. So they had some spare diodes and they just let me have those diodes. So let me show these as well quickly. There you go. So these are hundreds of these. These diodes are required, one per key, right? So I will have to separate them out, put them into the PCB, and these go right in. So that's one thing which is a good solid check mark. I got the diodes, and these are available even cheaply in India, so no issues there. But thankfully I got them from somebody I met, and I'll try to get all of the people who have helped me by either letting me have the parts or have sold these parts to me over the past year or so, right? I do want to get them onto the stream and maybe chat with them a little bit, because I guess this is more of a community keyboard at this point, right? Because so many people have contributed to just getting the parts together. So it should be a fun thing to chat with people who have contributed in various ways for this project. Right, so diodes are in. What else? Yeah, the resistors. So these resistors are needed for multiple reasons. I will get into these a little bit later, but for now let's just say I will acquire these, right? So these will be available, but not yet, right? I have another friend who has checked and probably has these diodes with them, and I will want to acquire it from them a little bit later. But these are needed when you're actually finally assembling the keyboard, which is not going to happen today. So they're not required immediately. The next set of components here are the small LEDs. These LEDs are, let me go back to the Ergodox web page. This doesn't show it, does it? So, right, so I'm looking for an image of the original. Yep, I think that one shows it. Right, so these three, right? So these three small diodes, small LEDs, they indicate various states of the keyboard. You can program them to indicate layers and so on. So they're very useful, but not super urgent. And I have LEDs, so that's not a problem, right? So I'll just mark them as yes. I don't have 3mm LEDs, so I'll probably have to ask around if somebody has them lying around. So let me mark this not yet. Right, so replacements could be SMD LEDs or just 5mm ones, right, which I have some of. Sorry, did I type 44? That's fine. Short jumpers, yes, because I'll just use the legs of the diodes instead of resistors. Hey Big Omega, are you still around? So this capacitor also I have, but it's in pretty bad shape. It's very old. It's more than a decade old from a previous life. So I just want to get a fresh one. So I'll also ask my friend who has the resistors to see if they have the capacitor as well. Right, so now coming to the connectors. So these USB connectors are needed for two reasons. So let me get to the Ergodox PCB layout. So one of the reasons why these USB ports are needed is because the microcontroller, like you see here, is mounted on the PCB and the port isn't directly accessible, right? So the design says mount a USB port onto the PCB facing outside and then connect the microcontroller's USB port into the external USB port. I think this makes sense because ultimately you don't want to have like a static cable coming out of your keyboard if you want it to be very portable, right? It's a pain to manage cables if they're attached to something. And hence with the external port, you would be able to remove a cable easily. However, I have a slightly different plan for this keyboard in the sense that I'm not planning to use a case. This is going to be a very, very bare keyboard with pretty much no protection from the outside world. So it's like, it looks geeky, but there is the reason of whether I have access to a case or ability to build one in this current time, right? So for now, I've chosen to go without a case, and hence I'm trying to skip these external USB ports as well. I know it's not a good idea because relying on the strength of the port mounted onto the microcontroller isn't a good idea. If it breaks, it's hard to replace and it's disruptive. So it's a best practice to actually have this kind of a external USB port soldered onto your onto your PCB and then map it like this. So although this is all good design, I'm going to take a risk here and actually depend on and plug my USB cord directly into the microcontroller. Also remember that I'm using two microcontrollers, right? So one for the left half, one for the right half. So one of the weird things I will have to do is to plug each of the microcontroller in separately. Now I have not fully thought this through. I probably will be able to power the one side of the microcontroller with an internal cable which just runs across the two halves. That's one possibility, but I'm not planning to do that. I mean, I've not decided. I might end up doing it. So as the project progresses, I'll have to make some of these decisions. But for now, I'm relying on just having access to these inbuilt ports of the microcontroller and using USB cables to directly attach to those, right? So I'm going to skip the requirement for the USB B mini connectors, right? So skip. So I'm deciding not to go with this. Now there's another, okay, so this is needed. So okay, so the reason these other, so there is one mini B connector, one mini B plug with a short cable, which we saw. I would have needed two of these, but I'm not going to do that design, so I don't need these. One USB cable A to male mini B, which I'm going to skip for now. I have this, so I'll just say yes. If I need it, I'll use it. Now coming to how the two sides are going to be connected, right? So for that, in the original design, they use a TRRS socket. So TRRS is tip, ring, sleeve. These are audio cables, as we colloquially call them. This is what we use to plug in our headphones and so on. So if I just go to side view, that is a TRS cable, tip, ring, sleeve. There is a slightly different version which has two ring ports, which is what is talked about in the design of the Ergodox. So this is a good idea because these cables are cheap, the ports are easily available as well. But let's see. One hope I have is that instead of having to take this design and use this side-to-side connector, I want to actually try hanging the two sides of the keyboard independently by their own USB cables. So that way, two possibilities are there. One is you use each half as an independent keyboard, which is not linked to the other at all. However, that raises a serious problem, which is that when you press a modifier key on one side of the keyboard, one half of the keyboard, you want that modifier to actually take effect for the other side as well, right? And this is obviously possible when you have either a single keyboard like this, because it's all one keyboard, or if you have two halves going which are directly connected to each other, because that modifier key is actually part of one big matrix. But if you use two independent half keyboards, pressing a modifier on one side, particularly a hardware modifier like a layer switch, right, doesn't have any effect on the other side. Now software modifiers like shift, alt, control, they are handled by the operating system, so those work as normal, right? You can press alt on one keyboard and F on another keyboard and say the file dialog will open up, right? As long as the two keyboards are attached to the same computer. But since a split keyboard requires heavy usage of the hardware modifiers, which internally the keyboard uses to generate a key code, right? The correct key code. For example, pressing one modifier and hitting AJKL generates arrow key codes, right? So for example, right now I have programmed this key to be that modifier. So if I hit this key and then use AJKL, they are left, down, up, right? Left, down, up, right. And these things are hidden from the operating system because the operating system just gets the correct arrow key code, right? It gets nothing when the hardware modifier is pressed. So that won't work if I don't ever connect the halves together, right? So as long as, however, there is the point of how do you connect these two halves? So you could use a TRRS jack on either side and then communicate via these 4 wires across. A 3-wire design is also possible with a slightly different selection in the firmware. So I have some options there, and hence for now I am skipping this as well, right? Because this is not something which I need to hard define today. At the very worst case, I will just include a direct cable from one half to the other without jacks, because I don't have the TRRS jacks and plugs for now. If required, I can procure them and attach them, right? So this is something I'll get to maybe in the next phase of the design. Now the case, skip, end of story. So I don't want a case simply because there are good options for a case available, but they are not really available off the shelf. So you have to take a design and get a case made. So you can get either a 3D printed case, or you could take a multi-layer laser cut acrylic case. So I like the designs of the cases, but for now I want to keep this very, very minimal, and a case isn't an essential thing. So in my case, what will happen is, okay, there's an overloaded case there. So for me, what will happen is the switches will be mounted directly on the PCBs without any plate in the middle, and they will actually be sitting like this on the desk, right? Now on the back will be soldered connectors, so I don't want to put them directly onto the desk. So I will have some sort of spacing below the PCB and a bottom mount kind of a thing, right? But I'll think of those later. And this will be completely bare keyboard, no cases at all. So that's just how I want to build it. Okay, keycaps. So I have keycaps. These are SA profile chalk theme keyboards, keycaps, and I will use this set on the ErgoDocs once it has been made. So yes, I have got, and yeah, thanks for another person whom I met, whom I got acquainted with over the Reddit for the Mechanical Keyboard India group, and they were able to send those keycaps to me as well. So this is awesome. I have most of the parts, particularly the critical parts that are necessary, the microcontroller and the switches. Really speaking, you can build a keyboard with just microcontrollers and switches, right? It'll work. Nothing else is needed. Almost all of it, all of the other things are for convenience, and in my case, I'm ready to trade off a bit of the convenience for actually having a working keyboard, because if I go after all aspects of convenience that are built into the design, I'll probably not have the parts for this, at least until the COVID situation ends, right? And I don't want to wait that long. Okay, so that's where we are. I have all the parts that I really, really need. So if I just filter out to what is available, so yes and not yet. Yeah, these are the things which I really need. The only thing missing is, so the resistors are needed. They are not optional. There are some resistors which are matched with the LEDs. So if I'm not putting in LEDs, I can skip these resistors, the 220 ohm ones. But I do need these 2.2 kilo ohm resistors. They are pull-up resistors which are needed for the connections across the two halves to work, as far as I can understand from the circuit diagram. And yeah, so I'm kind of, it's a throwback to one of the previous things I used to do, which is build a lot of circuits, do a bunch of robotics projects, and so on. So yeah, it's going to be a fun project for me, and I'm hoping to share more of this on future streams. For now, I wanted to kind of cover this part. If for some reason the music has stopped, let me see what's up with that. Oh wow, awesome. Pretzel Rocks, where are you? There you go. So here are my hopes for this stream, right? I'll try and settle down to a schedule. It would be on Sundays or at max Saturdays, but mostly Sundays. And one thing I will do is today I didn't reach out to many people to tell them I'm about to stream, but I will do that if the stream turns out to be okay. I'll watch the recorded version on Twitch. So if all goes well, what I'm hoping to do here is build this keyboard over maybe a couple of future streams. I do need this urgently because we have 3 PCs in our home right now with 2 keyboards. So I'm really having to unplug and move keyboards between PCs when they're needed. So which is very weird. Of course, we never planned to have three PCs being used simultaneously, but due to the COVID situation, that has become a necessity. So I kind of need this keyboard quickly. But the interesting part is I can fulfill the need of the second or third PC with just half of a keyboard. So this half, wow, look at this. Since this is green, this is what the green screen does. Awesome. Yeah, so these are some fun aspects of tech that I want to explore. There are a lot of options for future projects. I want to get into this habit of streaming more and more because I like sharing things with people, and particularly when there is some feedback. So right now it's just me talking to nobody directly, and Big Omega dropped in for a little while. But yeah, I'm hoping there will be more people to chat with on the stream in future. So that is one aspect of, or one reason to do a stream in first place. The other reason is to dedicate some time to these projects. Right now it becomes a little difficult to do that if I don't have a set schedule. So kind of if I look at the stream as a time resource, right, then I end up finding a chunk of time, maybe 2 hours or so, to actually do this stream, and then go back and continue on some things offline, but I'm trying to do most of this on stream here. So that's pretty much what I had in mind for this first stream. I went over the plan I went over a brief introduction of what I want to do with the stream in general, what projects I'm considering. I have some interesting ideas for future, but for now this is it, the keyboard. And we have parts for the keyboard. We have some adjustments needed, particularly on the microcontroller and the firmware sides. And then we have the actual build, right? So that's pretty much it for today. And what I'm hoping to do is check up with a few folks for the remaining parts, the resistors and the capacitor. These are also not super essential. I could get started with the build and these parts could come in later, because these aren't going to be needed on day one directly. So the next stream, what I'm going to do is I'm going to unpack the microcontrollers, solder pins to them, put them on a breadboard, flash the firmware, reprogram the firmware based on the mapping that I will also have to do between a Pro Micros circuit and a TeamZ 2.0 circuit, the pinout, sorry. And that's pretty much what I have in plan for the next stream. Hoping for some people to drop in and talk about it. So I'll reach out to the people who helped supply these parts or procure these parts that I am using. And I'll also reach out to a few friends who might keep bugging for such discussions anyway, right? So that's pretty much it for the stream today. I will close now and see hopefully more people next time.